Welcome
Where's
to
Joyce?
our final week of studying the book of Ruth. And let us begin with a prayer.
Okay.
Oh God, we thank you for all the blessings of this life. We thank you for your creation. We thank you for the sun, and we even thank you for the rain that waters and keeps things alive.
Yeah.
Dear Lord, today we pray for all those in our communities that are sick or are suffering. Surround them with your love and healing. Let them know they're not alone, that you are always with them and walking with them and holding them and caring for them. Dear Lord, we ask you to be with us today as we complete our study of the book of Ruth, as we see how these faithful women played a story in our story of Christ. Oh God, we thank you for your Son who chose the path of suffering for the sake of the world. Humble us by his example, point us to the path of obedience, and give us strength to follow your commands through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So last week, to those listening at home, I apologize that I forgot, I'm not blaming anyone, I forgot to hit record. And so we did chapter 3, where Ruth went to visit Boaz, and in a semi-sexual move, I guess, on him. They wound up kind of agreeing that they would be one, they would be married. But there was the matter of another relative that might stand in. Here we get a little bit of the Jewish law and the Jewish tradition that a woman was widowed, her nearest kin to step in and take care of her and also inherit the land. So there was a financial gain to this as well. So having no family in Moab where they were, they came back here to Judah and found Boaz, who was a relative, but not the closest one. So Boaz mentions that there is another kinsman that he needs to check with before he can, I guess, claim Ruth as his own. So we get a little insight in this chapter, in chapter 4, about how the legal process worked. We're going to see that Boaz is going to go to the gate of the city. And this is where business transactions happened. Everyone had to go in and out of the gate of the city. So in a small town, if you wanted to run into someone, you would put yourself by the gate, because sooner or later they would be coming in and out and you would find them. And you would also find witnesses. So if you needed to have a discussion of a legal kind, like they didn't have lawyers and such as we do now, where you would draw up a covenant and sign legal documents. If you had something legal, you would just gather your minion, you would gather your group of witnesses together and do whatever piece of business you had to do. And these witnesses would swear that this happened, and they would be the ones that would make it legal. So he goes to this gate and to wait for this kinsman. And this is where we will pick up in Ruth chapter 4. Does everybody have Ruth chapter 4?
Yep.
Okay, so if someone wants to read chapter 4, 1 to 12.
I'll read.
Okay, Peter.
Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know. For there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from me, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have brought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman.
So here, Boaz, I don't know if he's trying to trick this guy or what, but he says, oh, here's this land, you can have it. And the guy says, oh, sure, I'll take it. And he goes, oh, by the way, you also get this woman and her mother-in-law. Package deal. And he's like, oh, no. That deal doesn't sound so great anymore. Because now they, I guess, would be inheritors of some of his land, and he didn't want to ruin his inheritance. So he was like, yeah, no, I'm good. So he jumps out of this transaction. The witnesses are all there. They give the sandal, which was the sign that the transaction was like a handshake, I guess, giving of the sandal. And here they are, they bless them and say, may you produce children. It mentions Rachel and Leah, who were the mothers of all the tribes of Israel. So it's like here, they're blessing them to go ahead and be in this line and to go and produce. So interesting how they do transactions, right? Way different than we would do things here in 21st century, and especially in America. I don't know, they may be done this way in some places of the world still, but here it would be lawyers and legal things and all kinds of stuff. And we also would not treat the woman as the property. It kind of came along. It's like, like you buy a house and you have to take the renters or something, or you buy a stable and well, the horses come with, this is, you get this land, but people come with it. Like you kind of transfer the people with the land, which is very foreign to our way of thinking and our way of transferring property. But in those days, women were property.
Right.
And
You know what though, that I didn't know before, and I thought it was really interesting. He said that they had to buy the land from Naomi, so she did have some wealth there.
yeah,
They had to
I'm not
buy it
sure. Yeah.
because she. I mean, it's like you need money to make money. She didn't have any money to do anything with the land at this point. but it was her inheritance. And there was no one to leave it to. So, I mean,
Right, but
that's why,
she couldn't legally own the property. So even though it was in her
yes.
family,
And that's why they would have to have heirs. That's why that Naomi, Ruth then gets involved with this, but only because she was married to Naomi's son.
right.
So, but it is interesting that some provision, I mean, they could give her nothing very little for the property because they were kind of stuck, but then they also had to take care of them.
Right.
But it's interesting that at least there was some provision.
Right, which is why Naomi went back there, because she knew there was some way of getting taken care of somehow.
Something you can
Right.
take care of, yeah.
But this is why the heirs were so important. This is why this is why we hear of the people in the scriptures so desperate to have children and male heirs, because this is how the line would be carried on. This is how your wife or your mom or your daughters would be cared for, would be through this possession of the land, that you needed these male heirs to carry on the lineage and to be the property owners, keep the property in the family, or, so it was very important to have.
It was like that in England until about 3 years ago, when they changed the Ascension law to include females.
Oh, really?
So we haven't gone as far as we thought we did, huh? Yeah.
For two questions that I had, Joan Weiss. One, during all the years that Naomi and Elimelech were over in Moab, what happened to the land? Did it lay fallow, or did someone else use it while they were away? And the second more important question is, I was wondering why the nearest kin said, I would lose my patrimony if I buy the land and marry and take responsibility for Ruth. But Boaz was able to take the land and marry Ruth. Was it because he had already inherited from his father who had died? That's the only thing that occurs to me as to why he's free. Because they assume he's got a wife and he's got kids. So,
Right. So we don't really know that much about this person. Like he doesn't have a name. We don't even know what his name is. He's just next of kin or redeemer. So what we might assume is that, yeah, he already has a family. And if he now takes on Naomi, and what if they had kids? Now that splits the inheritance for his own children. Right?
no,
Maybe
but Boaz is older. But Boaz is older, and I'm not sure if it says anything about him having a wife and kids.
right.
But one would assume that he had a wife or has a wife and has kids. So why is he able to have this relationship with Naomi and Ruth and not have it jeopardize his patrimony?
I don't know if Boaz has a wife and kids.
Yeah, there's no mention of
I
that.
don't think he does.
No, I never mention it.
To him, this is a good thing because now he would have heirs. So he's happy to take on Ruth and any children he might have.
To be an old rich man and not to go ahead and marry.
I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these stories leave a lot of details up in the air that we're kind of left to kind of assume that yeah, I'm just looking to see if it makes any notes somewhere. I don't see anything that
Because just like Naomi said to Ruth, I want to see you settled. There must have been a lot of men and women who said, hey, Boaz, you're not getting any younger.
yeah, that could be it. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't say anything. It says it just says Boaz is a wealthy farmer. So we assume that he was, I mean, it did talk about all these like women and these servants. So maybe he was just a player. Maybe he was just, a wealthy guy that never settled down. It talked about how he was away and he came back. Maybe he liked to travel. Maybe he didn't want to settle down.
Maybe his wife and children died too,
That's possible as well.
because he said he was older, so
It's
who
possible
knows?
he had a wife that died and never had children, or in those days, it also was common that he might have had a wife that did not give him children and he might have divorced her. Because that happened too. If,
I think he was too good a man to do that.
yeah, it doesn't sound like his style. It sounds more like he just never maybe found the right person, or he just never, settled down. It happens. And now, being that people probably were reminding him, hey, Boaz, you're not getting any younger. And now with this woman, Ruth, who he liked and, seemed to be developing a relationship with, and then found out that it wasn't, kind of family, and that he would be helping out Naomi as a family member and getting Ruth, he was interested in marrying her. So there's,
At that time, I might be wrong, but wasn't it that
Didn't they have more than one, many cases have more than one wife?
I think in those days some did, but
And maybe that could be a situation because he would be getting the property and everything too.
it's possible, but I don't know. One would think that they would mention that, but maybe not. A lot of these stories, they only mention the part of the story that they think is important.
Yeah, there is an odd line, like in 11. I think it's 11. Then the elders and all those who at the gate, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. So maybe, Rachel and Leah were married to the same guy. Maybe, and who
I think
knows?
they
Yeah.
were earlier.
We're just assuming, I don't know. Again, in a lot of these stories were written with the thought that people would understand what was going on because they were close to the time of the stories. And so you would understand the culture, and like it doesn't explain about going to the gate and the scandal and stuff. It explains a little bit, but they assume that you know the culture and you would understand it. So it could be that we're supposed to assume either his wife died or he had another wife that couldn't give him children. Who knows?
I read that this story was written down about 500 years after it actually happened.
I'm sorry, you got a bad echo.
Yeah, I'm hearing an echo too.
Yeah, me too.
I read that this was written down about 500 years after it happened.
Yeah. Yeah, so in some of these stories, in many of these stories in the Bible, they're just passed on word of mouth, generations and generations, and probably Ruth's ancestors maybe told the story over and over about how grandma and grandpa got married and met each other. And, over time, some of the details get lost. Either it wasn't important to them, or they just never knew the details. We don't know. Anyway, so let's continue on and see what happens. Who wants to read from 13 to the end? So the story winds up.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. And the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then, the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron, the father of Ram, Ram, the father of Aminadab, Aminadab, the father of Nahshon, Nahshon, the father of Salmon, Salmon, the father of Boaz, Boaz, the father of Obed, Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David.
Okay. So this is a nice story because it ends happily ever after, we assume. They get married, they have children. And Naomi's happy now. She has a grandson that she gets to live with and raise. And now they are, a family. They're secure. They don't have to worry about what's going to happen. And it says the name Obed means servant. And it brought, at the end, it ends with a little bit of a genealogy of how this family is. If you look at the beginning of Matthew, turn to the Gospel of Matthew. We see this very genealogy right in the middle of this.
Yeah, there it is.
Starts an account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And then this one goes back further and starts with Abraham. It mentions Isaac and Jacob and Judah and Perez, which is where we picked up in this story. But then it has Jesse at the end of that paragraph, and David, and then it goes on to David and Solomon and Rehoboam and Abijah and Asa and Jehoshaphat and Joram and Uzziah and Jotham, and Hezekiah and Manasseh and Amos and Josiah and Jeconiah and the time of deportation. And then it goes further and it goes all the way down to the line of Joseph now, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born and called the Messiah. So this is like all the generations down to Jesus. So we see why this was an important part. And there's not too many, most of it is men, right? We have Tamar, we have Rahab, we have Ruth, and Mary.
Father of Jesse. Yeah.
Most of it is all the fathers, the father.
David.
It's only we have Mary, Jesus's mother, and then we have Ruth and Rahab, which is why their stories are included in our scriptures, because they were so important to this story and to this genealogy. So in this study, it asks, it compares Boaz type of says Christ as Redeemer. If we look at chapter 2, verse 20. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi said to her, the man is a relative of ours, our nearest of kin. this would be their someone to save them, their redeemer. Christ as Lord of the harvest in chapter 2, verse 3.
Chapter 2, verse 3. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled.
No, this is back in Ruth, sorry. Not in Matthew. We're back in Ruth. Ruth chapter 2, verse 3. Where she's gleaning in the fields, where Boaz is compared to Jesus providing like the food, and here Boaz is providing
Went into the fields.
the area that she can reap in order for them to survive. Says a dispenser of bread in 3, verse 15. This is where he sent her home after they were lying together that night on the threshing floor. He sends her home with a cloak full of barley. Right? He fills up her cloak and says, "Take this home." As
Right.
we don't know if that's like the price of kind of like a dowry type of a thing, but it's the bringing this food home to Ruth. And a man of valor in 2:1.
For now.
The prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So here, as we said, it doesn't really talk that much about God, except where Ruth is saying, where you go, I go, your God will be my God. That's pretty much the only mention really of God. Yet, where do we see God's hand in this story of Ruth and Naomi?
Well, the whole thing. First that Ruth went with Naomi. And that Naomi decided to travel all that way and go back. And that Ruth went with her and they managed to get there seemingly unharmed.
Mhm.
And that she managed to go get there at harvest time and go gleaning, where her mother-in-law sent her out to go gleaning, and she happened to wander into Boaz's. I think this is all God's hand. Wander into his field, and he happened to come home from a trip.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just everything just seemed to, and that Naomi could figure out what to say and do in this kind of tricky situation. All the
Yeah.
way through.
Too many coincidences, right?
Right. And Ruth's just incredible devotion.
How does Naomi's attitude change from the beginning of the book to the end?
Well, she goes from nothing. I mean, she goes from being, she says, call me, well, I can't remember the exact term.
Bitter.
Yeah,
Amor.
Bitter.
bitter. Call me bitter. Change my name to bitter.
Or
And then in the end, I don't know, Ruth gives her something else to look, I don't know, look forward to is the wrong word, but what gives her hope, I guess, and
Mhm.
renews everything. But I don't know, she gives her a whole new life. God leads this into a whole new life, and now she's got She's got a little money. She's got protection. She's got a family. She's got another son. Her friends say, "Look, Naomi's got a son." Her grandson is hers, and I mean, we all have grandchildren. They're yours. It's just, and so she's anything but bitter. She's just rich.
Right. So we have her at the beginning of the story and she's pretty much lost it all, right? She lost her husband, she
Everything.
lost her sons. Now we presume that she lost that whole life in Moab and has to now leave. She's got nothing. And now at the end, like you said, she's got someone to take Boaz to help take care of her. Ruth has been her constant companion and someone that's loyal to her. And now she's got a grandson and who knows, how many more. But yeah, she's got safety, security, and love.
Community, got everything.
Community.
Yeah.
Right. She's back home with some of her friends that she had left. So it suggests that we read Genesis 38 so we can see how some of this is going back and forth. We're going to take a look at Genesis 38. And this is about how Tamar is involved in the story. So someone wants to read 1 through 11.
I'll give it a shot, even though there's a lot of names in there.
Well, you can just skip over. Let's make up names.
It's funny. Pastor Brandt told me that too when I told him a year ago I started reading the Bible, and he said, "Well, you can just skip all that stuff up in the front, don't you?"
I had once at my internship, there was a gentleman who was reading, who was a funny guy. And one time there was a reading about a couple sisters. I think it was like Phoebe and Lydia or something. I mean, the names were not that hard, but he was having trouble with them. So he's looking at it and he goes, "I'm just gonna say sisters." So I was like, say whatever whatever, just try it. It's easy. So he gets up there and I'm waiting and he's reading and he goes, "The sisters." And everyone just kind of gave a chuckle. It's like, fine.
All right, here we go. Bear with me. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went in to her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also.
Wow.
Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up," for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house.
Interesting, huh?
Pretty tough crowd.
Gotta be careful what you were doing there.
Yeah, really.
That's right. Again, if you think the Bible's boring. Right? You gotta read some of these juicy parts. Yeah. So let's see, who wants to read 12 to 19? Let's see how many more people get killed here.
Okay. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah. So the men who were shearing his sheep and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Enam, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. I'll send you a young goat from the flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She asked. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand, she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Is that what you wanted me to read up to?
Yeah. So here we have now, he winds up sleeping with his daughter-in-law. Because she disguised herself and gets like really crazy here. It's very, very convoluted here. And then she wants the staff and the signet ring. Why would you think she would want that from him?
Identity.
Identity, right? So that if she had a child, she'd be able to prove whose it was, right? That it was his.
Or even that he hasn't really fulfilled his promise to her. So
Right.
she wants, before she gets the sheep, at least she wants
Right.
some,
She'd like catch him
yeah,
the lie, catch him in,
yes, exactly.
lied to her. And yeah. All right, so let's continue on. In 20, I guess you could read 20 to the end of the chapter.
I'll go again.
Okay.
When Judas sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also, the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. Then Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. As
Oh,
she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, she put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out, and she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah.
wow.
Yeah, so here we have again, back to kind of like the Isaac story where we have the boys that were fighting over the blessing and who came out first, right?
Isaac. All right.
And now, so we have that playing out again. And then we have the If you look at Perez, does that name sound familiar?
Yeah, over there in Ruth.
Right. Right. So here we have so they have some interesting ancestry in their background. Um, that and one would think that, I mean, he's not like, oh, I have to hide this kid because everyone's going to know that I slept with my daughter. He's just like, ah, you got me. It's like, yeah, okay. I shouldn't have lied to you. I shouldn't have promised my son. Yep. Yeah, you got me. So one might assume that unfortunately this kind of stuff happened in that day. And it says, why might the people in Ruth point back to this incident in pronouncing their blessing upon Ruth and Boaz?
Well, who do you know was the first son? Who was the first son born? They marked one as being the first, but the other came out first. So
Right.
who was first?
I don't
guess-
know. I guess did they go by the crimps? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a family fight about that. Yeah, I mean, Perez, one would think, is the one that had, came out first, but
Hide on them or whatever.
yeah, so interesting how in those that early times, how the things went, right? How blessings
Right.
were bestowed, how line of succession was taken, and how important some of these stories in our past become, right? And so, and there's also, so there's a lot of interesting people in Boaz's past. It mentions Rahab is also in
Mhm.
his lineage, right? So, she was someone, an outsider as well. So maybe this led Boaz to be more accepting of people that were outsiders, that were taken in, that needed to be protected, because this had happened in his family. That's why they point out to Tamar and to Rahab, that he had probably heard these stories and went, well, my family is a mixture of all these insiders, outsiders, and that he would continue that line of protecting some of these women that had gotten, cast aside and not treated fairly. And interesting that these are all the people in Jesus's lineage, right? It's not all the perfect people that play by the rules. Some of the people that had the silver spoons and were treated the best and had no struggles in their life. The people in Jesus's lineage had some rough times. Went through a lot. And so this is one of the stories that points to Jesus being inclusive, Jesus coming, knowing our struggles and our pain, and how, and here as Boaz being like the redemptor, the person that would redeem them. We also have, if we look at Luke, first chapter of Luke. First chapter of Luke, 46 to 55. Something very familiar to most of us, I would think.
What is this?
Luke,
Ruth?
chapter 1, verse 46 to 55.
Chapter 1.
Shall I read?
Sure.
And Mary said, My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. For he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the mighty one has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, even as he said to our fathers. Mary stayed with Elizabeth for about 3 months and then returned home.
Right, so this is Mary again talking about the how God sometimes intervenes and upsets things, right? Feeds the hungry, looks on those lowly, those outcast, those that are forgotten. Because this is part of like their history, right? This is part of what they had lived, and she credited God with being there with her through these times. We show how see how any of this relates like to Ruth, to what she went through.
Humility.
Mm-hmm.
Their characters. Willing to let the Lord have the way and being obedient to what he wants.
Right. I mean, she didn't have a whole lot of choice in a lot of this stuff that happened to her. Naomi kind of guided the way, and at the very beginning of the book of Ruth, Ruth gives over the guidance of her life to Naomi and to Naomi's God, and says, "Your God will be my God, and I will follow you." And she trusted that God had a plan and would get them through this, even though they were in bad shape in desperate times when they started this road together.
I mean, part of this, could this, like when they talk in the Jewish faith, Judaism, that the bloodline is really carried down to the mothers, the female side of the family, and that things are not tainted because of that. Whatever the men did, but the bloodline itself seems to be, from the mother's side more than the father. Even though it seems like the men are redeemed as or revealed as the head, it's the woman who holds the seed of life for the perpetuation. I can't talk the family name.
Yeah, and I think in the Jewish culture, it's if your mother is Jewish, then you're Jew. It goes like the cult, the religion goes down through that. Yes, here, all the women in these stories, they didn't really do anything wrong, right? They were victims of society, victims of their times, victims of circumstances.
As soon as I'm done.
And they were the ones that had to deal with whatever circumstances that they had, and rely on God to get them through.
Outside. On the deck. Go on
these things. So what do we think? So what can we carry forward out of the book of Ruth? Any lessons to be learned? mean, it points to God being with them the whole time, points to, as we see the Redeemer, Boaz,
The
being,
redemption.
right, the redemption. And that, like they never gave up. Naomi kind of gave up a little bit, but when she was down and depressed, one would guess, and said to call her bitter. But then she saw God working through this, and then, worked with that new plan that was given
Really,
and came out better, more hopeful and restored at the end of our story. But it shows the inclusion of many people in God's plan, right? Here you have Naomi and Elimelech going out of the area. The son's taking Moabite, which would be like the Gentile, the non-Jewish spouses. They didn't have children, but they might have. But being open to spreading their family with these foreigners, right? And then going back and bringing the foreigner back with her, bringing Ruth back to Jerusalem, and her being accepted and welcomed into their family, and now becoming part of the lineage, the important lineage of Jesus. As which is, probably all the more reason why during Jesus' ministry you see him reaching out to Gentiles, and because that's part of who his people were. His people, yes, they were Jewish, but he had a lot of other people in his lineage that were not.
Yeah.
So it would make sense for him to reach out to others, to the foreigner, to the stranger, because his family had been the foreigner, had been the stranger, had been the outcast, had been the widows. It was important to him that justice and inclusion go to them. So it's an interesting little tale in the Bible. So going forward, we have, I'm still waiting for Pastor Shefflin to say exactly when we're going to start the summer, but I would presume end of June or July at the beach. So until
I
then,
found this. I found my bookmark. I found my bookmark from 2 years ago.
3 years ago, okay. What did you study 3 years ago there?
2 years ago. I don't Thomas, Simon, Peter, Andrew, James. So it was,
Okay.
I know.
It was all about the saints. It was a
The
different
saints?
saint
About
each
the
week.
disciples.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, so we're working on something for the summer. Like I say, one idea I had was if you want to start next week, we could just start reading through like the book of Acts. I don't know if you've done that before, to see how the early church began, and a lot of interesting stories in Acts. Or we could look at the Sunday readings, or whatever else. Anybody has any other ideas?
Sounds good to me.
Acts, yeah,
Yeah, Acts sounds good.
yeah.
So next week we will start to read through the book of Acts, and see how the early church, maybe we'll probably get Pentecost a little early before Pentecost, but that's okay. But we'll see. It's timely given where we are in the church year, and it's an important book, has a lot of really important stories of our faith in there too. So, all right. So next week we will start with Acts. Any other thoughts for this week? Okay, so let us end with the Lord's Prayer, and be well and stay safe, and hopefully, I think tomorrow maybe get out and enjoy the sunshine.
Tomorrow. The sun will come out tomorrow.
Kind of gloomy today. Hopefully tomorrow will be a little nicer. Anyway,
Right.
Lord, gather us into one as we pray. Our Father, who
Lord,
art
art in heaven,
hallowed be
Hallowed
thy
Be
Thy name, thy kingdom come.
Thy will be done
earth as it is in
on
heaven.
earth as it is in heaven.
Give us
This
today our
is the day of
Right.
our
Daily bread.
Our
Give us
As
our
we
trespasses,
forgive
trespasses.
those who trespass against
those
us.
Please forgive
Lead us
those
not into
who trespass
temptation,
against
but
us.
deliver us from
Deliver
evil.
us from
For
evil.
thine is the
Thine
kingdom,
is the kingdom,
power, and the
power,
glory, forever and ever. Amen.
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 All
Amen.
right, everybody, let me